My name is Joel St. John, and this is my colleague, Nicolas Guigo, and we are security consultants with a company called ISEC Partners that's based out of Seattle, Washington in the United States. And we're here to talk to you guys today all about cheating in online games. All right, so first, a bit of an agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and how cheating has evolved over the past couple decades. We'll talk a little bit about what we consider an arms race between the cheaters and the developers and otherwise that are trying to prevent them from cheating. We'll talk a little bit about where we see the future of cheating going. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the anti-cheat software and some practical attacks that we've discovered in one of the popular anti-cheat libraries. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about solutions and conclusions, ways to prevent some of the attacks that we've been talking about and how the gaming industry can sort of evolve to help battle cheaters. All right, so first, let's talk a little bit about electronic sports or esports. So the competitive gaming scene has sort of taken off as online gaming has become more prevalent. It originally kind of started with offline LAN tournaments and has since evolved, as things have progressed on the internet. In Korea in particular, we've seen the televising of games. It's kind of started with StarCraft 1, and it has taken off with newer games over the years. But it has greatly increased in recent years. And so we're seeing some of the larger events. For instance, the League of Legends World Championships in 2013 had 32 million worldwide viewers. The Dota 2014 had 20 million viewers. That's a respectable amount of people that are tuning in for these events. To give some context, we look at forgive us, we're kind of biased by being from the U.S., but we look at things like the Major League Baseball, the World Series had 14.9. The National Basketball Association, the final games in there aren't getting as many as some of these electronic sports tournaments, and that really gives some context to how this has been blowing up in recent years. It's got a bit left to go for some of the bigger events like football and things like that, but it's definitely gaining traction and more people are getting into it, which we think is great. But it's kind of interesting to see how these numbers are starting to develop. All right, so in addition to this, as the gaming industry has been growing, we're seeing more and more money getting involved in all the different stages within it. It's become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we see people making money in a lot of different ways. So some of the publishers have subscription models, so you see that in a lot of MMORPGs and such that have a monthly fee to let you play, and that's sort of where they're making their money. On the side of the gamers themselves, they're seeing high value in streaming their content through sites like YouTube and Twitch, and some of these guys are making quite a bit of money doing that. And then they're also garnering sponsorships through some of the OEMs and otherwise that want to publish their ads on their stream. Finally, we also see a bit of a virtual gray market. So in again, games like MMORPGs, if you have in-game currency, items, anything that you can really attach a real-life value to, you can probably sell online in one way or another. It might be against the terms of service, but there's not really a good way for them to prevent those sorts of transactions from going. And so as the money becomes more and more of an issue, we're seeing cheating become a more and more profitable venue. And so it's becoming a lot more sophisticated. All right, so just to get on the same page, what do we consider cheating? So we can generally, lump it into a couple different categories. So the first here is, somehow gaining an unfair advantage through abusing, game logic in one way or another. So depending on the game, this could be something like using multiple accounts to play several characters at the same time. It might give you a bit of an advantage over a player that sticks to the rules and plays one. We see botting and scripting in some of the different genres. Again, MMORPGs, bots have been rampant since the get-go. And then in addition to that, we also see in a lot of games that will push sort of extraneous client-side data to their platform and players can take advantage of that if they know how. In addition to this, we have a different category where you are actually abusing bugs or glitches in the code base, or actually attacking other players, exploiting vulnerabilities in that, or attacking the game server itself. So losing a game, you can crash the server, and then hey, you're not losing anymore. For the purposes of this talk and for our research, we really focused on the first category of this. So yeah, okay. All right, so a bit about the history of cheating in games. So in early computer games, generally tended to be single player, and at that point in time, who cares if we're cheating? It was very easy. You could simply patch game clients, whatever you wanted to do, because again, the only person you're affecting is yourself. So who cares, right? In the early multiplayer games, that's where we really saw cheating start to take off as a lot of these developers started to make it big. Their games became very popular. They're mostly designed with functionality in mind over security. And so there are a lot of different areas where you could exploit vulnerabilities in the code itself or attack other players. So yeah. As this has progressed into the modern multiplayer games, we're seeing a lot more emphasis being put on security. And so it's actually the bar is quite a bit higher on a lot of the established games out there. So let's talk a little bit about examples of the different types of cheating that we see in some of the current online games. So a couple of the common sort of cheating vectors. One of the big ones that we see are speed or movement hacks. So you can think of it as moving faster than intended, flying through the air if that's not by design, things like that, teleportation, etc. Another one that we see in a lot of games, as I mentioned before, is going to be botting. So for instance here, World of Warcraft, I'm sure lots of you have probably played, but the gathering of different resources in that game, so be it minerals or herbs, things like that, is kind of a tedious process, and it's one that is easily adaptable for a bot. And so people will write these to run for hours offline, and then they can take those resources and sell them either for the in-game currency or offline if it's something else. But generally we see it converted to in-game currency and then sold to whoever is willing to buy it. In addition to these, we see scripting or aimbots. So scripting is the idea of, so you have certain games, StarCraft 2, League of Legends, things like that, where the skill that you have in these games is very directly correlated to the amount of actions that you can perform in any given time. And so what scripters will end up doing is, say you have 10 actions that if you perform with the right timing and the right order, all of that provide some sort of advantage for you. Well, with these different scripts, you can narrow it down to being able to press one button and all of a sudden that is doing all of that for you. You can aim in certain directions, and so that obviously that has a big impact on the other players in the games. Aimbots are sort of similar sort of thing. We see those in a lot of first-person shooters. So if you can always land a headshot, then you're probably going to be doing better than your competition. In addition to these, we see things like player and item finding hacks. So the example we have here, this is DayZ, which is a survival horror sort of game where death is permanent. Every time you start, you have to start from scratch. You have pretty much nothing to your name, so you have to go around, find items, then find other players, and you're trying to kill them, they're trying to kill you, etc. And so these sorts of cheats, as you can see in here, are highlighting all of the items as well as the other players in the game, so that at any given point in time, you know where they are, how to get them, and it's really devastating for any of the legitimate players in the game. All right, finally, we've got sort of in a similar vein, wall hacks and X-ray mods that will let you see through terrain, again, to find items or players, things like that. This example is from Counter-Strike. So in this one, you're really just, since your client has the data on where the other players in the game are, all we're doing here is highlighting where that's happening. And so obviously that's going to be pretty detrimental to the legitimate players of the game. But yeah, just a few examples. All right, so as cheaters become more and more of a problem, we've seen the rise of anti-cheat software. So one of the big ones is going to be the Warden software that's associated with the Blizzard series of games. It was first published with World of Warcraft, and I think has been included in every game since. And so, StarCraft 2, I think Heroes of the Storm is using that. With Valve, we've seen the Valve anti-cheat, or VAC, developed back in 2002, and each of their games, well, not all of them, but they generally take advantage of it in one way or another. And then finally, we see some third-party vendors, so BattlEye, for instance, that is one that game developers can actually take and integrate into their products. And we're seeing that with games like Arma 2 and 3, DayZ, as we were talking about before. But there are quite a few of these, and we can't really list them all. But they tend to have some similarities. So they tend to operate in userland. They tend to be very reactive, so they will discover cheat, they will develop some signatures to detect it in one way or another, and then they'll add it to some sort of blacklist to prevent people from using that cheat in their games. In addition to this, they're really only intended to be a mitigation. So if these developers can stop 95% of the cheaters in their games, that's a win for them. And so they're, again, just really trying to stop the majority of the cheaters in there. It's not meant to be a comprehensive solution. They sort of know that determined people will probably still be able to cheat in one way or another. All right. So I'll turn it over to Nicolas to talk a little bit about the current state of cheating in games.
Hey guys. So Joel just covered the what we're looking at in terms of cheats. So we're going to jump right through on like the how. So how this works. So most of the cheats out there are based off a DLL injection. Which means that you have two components. You have a DLL that actually contains the cheat logic, and then DLL injector, which is a pretty common thing, but essentially what it will do, it will inject the DLL into the game process, and then once the DLL is in there, it will install hooks, and usually around DirectX calls in order to display ESPs for extrasensory perception. So this is what I showed you for the Counter-Strike example or the DayZ example. So you'll be able to see enemies that you're not supposed to, like wall hacks and things like that. And also, since the DLL, the cheat itself, is executing within the context, within the process address space of the game, it has full access to read and write without any performance hit. It's running as if it were part of the game. A second type of cheat is attempting to be a little more subtle than going in there and just patching things out. It's external cheat. So what this does is the cheat will run into a different process, and it will be calling read process memory and write process memory to read and write data from the game. Generally, patching is not involved in there, except, well, what I mean is patching in-game is not involved. It's all just using these system calls. And in order to display an ESP, so in order to display something for the cheat, they usually use a transparent windows, which is a window feature, Microsoft Windows feature, that allows you to display things on top of it. Transparent windows do not pick up keyboard or mouse input, so it's only just visual. That's how they do it. Now, a third type that is pretty common of cheats are going to leverage the network packets. So what they do is they reverse the game protocol, and then they use this information, let's say, to replay packets or modify packets or introduce lag. So to be more specific, let's say there's a packet that says, I just dealt damage to that player of 50. Cool. Well, let's replay that packet a couple of hundred times and see what happens. So that's pretty straightforward. Or modify packets, same idea. The lag is actually pretty interesting. For shooters, for instance, your client, your game client, is going to be sending your player's position to the server at regular intervals. In turn, the server will forward that information to all the other players. Now, if you just find that packet and manage to hold it back, and just drop it, as in a firewall, then the other players, the server, and the other players are not going to get your character's position. So in effect, it will appear to them as you're teleporting around. You guys can imagine how that can be an advantage. So now that's the how for the cheats. Now let's look at the how for the anti-cheats. Well, anti-cheats, they're answering every single one of these cheat mechanisms with in kind of like a one-to-one fashion. So for in-process cheats, the DLL that is in the game process, they do a bunch of signature checks like antiviruses do. There's some game-specific checks. For instance, let's say that the maximum life is 100. Well, if you go and patch it to be 120 and send that to the server, well, actually, no, not sending to the server. This is the in process, so they might actually pick it up. Also, hook detections. Well, all the patches that I was mentioning in DirectX or in modifying whatever vtable with C++ objects and things like that. So wherever the hooks are known to be found, they will check for that. And also, the call stacks periodic checks. Now that one is the one that is actually a bit more interesting. You have a thread, that is going to be running in the process, for the anti-cheat purposes, and then it will wake up at certain intervals and check all the stacks for all the threads in the process. If it finds something that it's not supposed to be there, it has a list of valid stacks, or a list of, I don't know if it's blacklist or whitelist, but basically they check all your thread stacks and see if there's something they don't like. Well, you get caught, and then you have a bad time. You get banned or kicked, or depending on the game, depending on the protocol. Now, another one that is interesting is debug-related detection. So cheats got a little smarter in the way they do things. So they achieve the same thing, but the way they do it is they leverage exception handling. So instead of hooking by just patching in there, what they would do is maybe put int3, like a OXCC instruction, which will drop into debugging. So basically, they would leverage debug features to hook in a way that is a little more subtle. Also, we believe it's been used as an anti-debug mechanism so that cheats cannot be, to try to make cheat development more difficult. So if you're trying to debug the game and put breakpoints in there, then catch you as a cheater and ban you. For out of process, it's roughly the same thing. What it will do is it will just open all your processes and scan them for signatures, for DLLs. The ones that are a bit smarter will also try to do pattern searching in all the address space, not just the ones that are flagged as executable, but all the memory regions that you have in your processes. Oh, and in order to do that, in order to be able to open all the processes on the system, they usually need to be running as system themselves. Otherwise, some processes may not open so easily. Now, there's a few other things that we've seen. For instance, signature for, scanning files offline. So right now we've been talking about scanning, the processes, right? What's actually running. But what they've been doing is actually scanning your files on disk, which, might be a privacy concern. I'll let you decide that. Another thing that was a privacy concern a little while ago was that they were checking for your DNS queries, because a lot of the paid cheats auto-update, because every time a cheat gets detected, then you need to update the cheat and to bypass the detection. So what they would do, what the anti-cheat would do, is check for your DNS queries to see if you've been in your history, if you've been reaching out to a cheat server, a paid cheat server, that is. Also, it made a bit of noise last year, a couple of years ago, because of the privacy issue. And various types of obfuscations. Anything that you can find in any decent crack me or obfuscator or anything like that. The future of cheating. So one way we see it going, and what we're going to demonstrate, is a rootkit-like functionality to hide the activity of the cheat. So the way we developed a proof of concept is a kernel driver that loads first, and that will protect the user mode executable. So user mode executable will be sort of an external cheat, except that instead of calling the noisy and slow read process memory, write process memory, the user mode executable will actually call into the driver, and the driver will map game pages from the game process directly into the cheat address space. So that way you can read and write the game process address space, just like if you were an internal cheat, but there's no need for patching, and it's really fast, and basically it's the best of both worlds between in-proc and out-of-proc cheats. Also, in order to deter the offline file scanning, we haven't implemented this, but it's pretty common knowledge that you can just install a filter driver on top of the file system stack, and then whenever your cheat is about to get read as a file, then you just say there's no file here. What are you looking at? So that's it. So the way it would look is roughly like this. Well, the way it looks is roughly like this. Basically, this is your game process, and you have game data here that contains your life or any other kind of information that you should not be able to muck with. And then So this is a virtualized page table, a abstracted page table, right? It doesn't really work like that. It's got multiple layers, but essentially it provides a mapping between a virtual address. You know, here it's 42,000, and it maps roughly to the in RAM to a physical address to make things. You know, this is a bit of a shortcut, but this is how it works. This translation is performed by the MMU, by your processor, so it's done automatically. This is a memory management unit, and so this is how it works. So once your cheat calls into the driver, then it looks like this. So what happens is, as you see, it might be mapped at a different address in the process, but essentially it's the exact same data. So this data that the game process sees at this address, you have access to it for read and write right here, because the driver will set up your cheat process page tables in order to reflect that. So you're your cheat process, and you can just read and write to that memory, and it will be, well, it's pretty transparent, right? In terms of performance, nothing, just zero hit. I mean, the initial hit is because you need to call Nyoctl into the driver and say, please map this area. But once this is done, you're good to go. So how to do this? Well, actually, it's public and it's documented. So you don't even have to write some assembly, and there's no need to go into undocumented APIs or anything like that. The interesting ones, the interesting APIs here, so are you know, PS lookup process by process ID, which is finding the game process, and then allocate MDL. So an MDL is a memory descriptor list. It's basically a Microsoft-defined data structure that contains, it describes physical addresses. So remember what I had in the bottom in the previous slide, you know, your RAM. So this is what it's about. So K stack attach process and K unstack detach process are the APIs that are going to able to make sure that your cheat thread is going to be jumped into, is going to execute in the context of the game process. So when you start here, you're in your cheat process, and then you call this guy, and you end up in the game process. Once you're in the game process, you fill the MDL with the information of the virtual address that you're looking for. The virtual address range that you're looking for is going to be in your MDL. Then you go back to your process with K and stack detach process, and you map it using this API. Then you end up with this. Again, this is on MSDN, this is public, and this is documented. This is only an excerpt, but that's the idea. Then a little bit of reference counting and you know, kernel object dereferencing, freeing pools, you know, the usual deal. So we have a quick demo for this. It's pretty simple, it's pretty rough, but that kind of illustrates the point. Okay, so this is how it looks. What we're going to do, if the demo works, that is without getting a handle to the Notepad, we're going to read and write its buffer. All right, so let's just start. So here we just start the driver. Okay, started. Now we're going to call that little proof of concept. All right. So apparently the Notepad buffer is at this address in the remote process, in the Notepad process. So basically, as you could see, we were reading in real time the what was going into the buffer, and then I had a little string compare thing, and whenever the key phrase is entered, then you get a Star Wars reference. Isn't that beautiful? Now the interesting part of this is that if we look at my, and I haven't cheated, it's not like I had a handle and I closed it, right? So the interesting part here is that if you open the process and you look at the handles, all this was happening without using the conventional cheat method, which is get a handle and do read process, write process. So there's no handle. This is all completely transparent, which makes it very difficult to detect. Not impossible, but it's very difficult. Okay, how do I get this back? All right. So pros and cons. What I did? Oh. All right. So pros and cons. Well, as you can, so the strength of this kind of method is generic. So it is not something that's specific to a game or a certain type of cheat or anything. You can apply that to anything. It's virtually undetectable from user mode. So, I mean, there are anti-cheats that go into kernel, and I will talk about them. But all the majority of anti-cheats out there are user mode only. And what this does is that it renders them, it is virtually undetectable from these guys. Then it's a straightforward conversion from publicly available cheat sources. So there are, public cheats. The problem with them is that they're usually detected because they're public. So there's a signature for it. As soon as you start loading it up, you will get detected, you will get banned. With very little work, basically replacing the calls to read process memory, write process memory, replacing the calls to that with calls to the driver. If you have a nice little interface, then you can just easily convert it turn it into a detected public cheat into an undetected private cheat, very simply. And the performance is good, like we saw. It's leveraged by the hardware. The pages are basically dual mapped, and it goes very, very quick. The limitations, well, obviously, we're in kernel, so if the anti-cheats also jump into kernel, then it levels the playfield, and then it turns into a good old antivirus versus virus, complete mess, which prompted Microsoft to, introduce PatchGuard. Then another thing about it is that you need to be running your machine in debug mode or to get your driver signed. It's up to you. Now, another thing, now this is actually a second part of the presentation. Right now we've shown you the limitations of anti-cheats and how we can defeat that. Now about the anti-cheats themselves, now we're going to actually attack. We're going to show you a couple of attacks that we developed against an anti-cheat. Well, while they're trying to prevent people from cheating, they actually open up an attack surface on the client and on the server. And the interesting part of this is when you have a vulnerability in a game, well, you have a vulnerability in the game, that's it. When you have a vulnerability in an anti-cheat that is running on multiple games, you have broad applicability. So what happens when there's a flaw? Well, you get a flaw in many games. So our case study here is BattlEye. The way it works is that you have a BattlEye global server that keeps track of accounts and bans and things like that. And then for each game server, they're running a little server DLL, and each client runs a BattlEye client DLL. The way that the way that BattlEye communicates, server and client together is by hooking the receive call, and it does that, and it looks for a certain packet structure. The packet structure looks like this. It starts with B and E, which is a signature. Then there is some hash that we had to reverse to do our proof of concept. And then there's a length, and then there's the data. It's a pretty simple, straightforward, packet structure. We've seen that before. And so we found a couple of bugs in this. So the first one is a sign extension gone wrong. Remember the length that we just showed you guys about a second ago in the packet structure? Well, it gets read here, and it gets shoved into CL. And if it's not FF, then we go over here. I'm not sure if you guys can see, but we see a move SX, which is very, very evil, because what SX will do is it will sign extend the length. So what they did is basically they used the sign type to describe the length. And so you end up with a very large number in ESI. Then a little later down the road, when they're processing the packet, they add 4 to this. So if we pass FC, you end up with FFFFFFC. You add 4, you end up with 0. And then the call over here to the operator new, it will basically allocate some memory, allocate 0, and you will get with a heap minimum allocation. So you end up with a very small buffer, 4 bytes, probably 4 bytes if you're on x86. Then they end up storing it at EBP plus 4, and they pick it back up over here. EBP plus 4 ends up in ECX, and then they drop 7 out of there. So you go from 0 to a really large unsigned integer, roughly. And that gets passed to memcopy. So you end up with a small buffer and a big copy. You trash the whole heap. So that was bug 1. Well, exploitability, as you can imagine, with a copy of FFFFFFF something, a denial of service is going to be pretty quick to attain with 1 packet. Remote code execution is possible because, well, we are overriding heap data, and the data we're overriding with is attacker controlled. Now, it might be pretty difficult because separate heap limits the attack surface. We actually had a hard time finding a vtable or anything interesting to override in here, but we came up with a tool to help us find things, and we found a couple of things. But exploitation, I mean, complete remote code execution was a bit out of scope here, because if you think about it, a DOS in this kind of scenario is already pretty bad. I mean, as Joel mentioned, there's a lot of money in this, so if you're in a ranked game or something like that, and you're in a corner and everybody hates you, or you're getting shot at, and you can just pop the server, that is already kind of a big deal. Another thing that makes the exploitation difficult is that there's a race condition. So you're actually going to have to get code execution and stop the thread before it trashes the address space and pops with a write 80. So yeah, so possible, just very difficult. DOS is obvious. And then the second bug we found in the anti-cheat has to do with the login to the admin console. And I'll pass it back to Joel for this.
All right, so the second one here, when you want to access the admin console for BattlEye, it's going to do a couple of things. The first thing it's going to do is check the length of the provided password against the stored value for that. And so that makes it pretty easy to determine based on the timing what the actual length of that password is. It doesn't take many requests at all. Once you have the correct length for that, it's going to jump into the second piece here, where it's going to perform just a straightforward string comparison against the stored password. And so what you can do here is as it's doing that, it's going to go character by character, and as it gets more correct characters in the password, it's going to take longer. And with a high enough sample size, we can actually measure that. And so we actually have another demo here. So that sucks. Sorry, one sec. I had this set up. Oh, let's see if this works. Sorry, I had this going, and apparently it decided to close while we were getting ready to go. Okay, so the first thing we have going on here, we're just, oh, come on. We used password safe just to generate a long random password. So that's what's going over here in that side. No, it's fine. Sorry, this was originally on a much bigger screen, so we had a little more room to work here. What we have done then is we've copied the password over here into the configuration file, and then, oh, it's not even running. All right, that's great. Yeah. All right. Again, sorry. All right, so we have a Python script here that is going to be using that. So we showed you the packet structure. We wrote some scripts that will mimic that structure and then generate something like, I think, 500,000 requests for each character. And so that's going to be starting over here on the side. It's probably a little hard to make out, but we kind of going through one at a time. And we fast forwarded a little bit here, but so it's just going through. And if I can move it a little bit, so each, I can move it without it breaking. You can see it kind of going through here, and it's matching up with the password that we randomly generated. It'll take a little bit here. I think it's like a 24 character password, but bear with us. But so for this stack, we're actually exploiting locally, which is just to show that it's possible. But it could be pretty easily adapted to work over the network. It would take a significantly higher amount of packets and more time and all of that. But there's no reason why it will work. So what I've brought up here on the other side, we've got the actual admin console that's sort of just watching for any activity in the admin console. And give it a few more. So I think we're back in real time now. And there it goes. So you can see once the attack's finished, it's guessed all of the correct characters in the password, and we can see the admin account has logged into the remote console. All in all, this attack took 17 minutes to guess a completely random 24-character password. All right. Okay, so that's it for that. So for these two vulnerabilities, we found them back in August of 2014 and reported them to the vendor. Currently, the first bug that Nicolas talked about has been fixed. We haven't looked too much at the fix, but I think took a brief look and it all looked good there. As far as the timing attack with the login vulnerability, I believe that's still sort of unpatched to date. Didn't seem like too big of a deal, but hopefully somewhere in the future they remedy that. Since we originally did this research, BattlEye has actually changed the way that they operate a little bit, and they've created a kernel component to the anti-cheat library. And so we haven't actually had any time to look at that at all, but it's sort of an interesting re-architecture that may have other implications that we'll talk about a little bit. All right, so as far as where we see anti-cheat going, as this arm race sort of continues, we're going to see some of the anti-cheat libraries, as we mentioned before, like BattlEye, starting to move that arms race into the kernel. In addition to this, we see some games, League of Legends, Counter-Strike, quite a few other ones, that have actually introduced a human factor into it. So where you have, I believe it's like the Tribunal in League of Legends, I can't remember what it's called in Counter-Strike, where you have players policing each other. So is it also, okay, no, Tribunal in Counter-Strike as well then. And so it turns out, people are pretty good at recognizing other, players cheating in the game. And so you can help, mitigate some of that by giving them the ability to, report each other and review that sort of information. As far as, full-blown solutions, that's definitely a trickier problem because at the end of the day, a lot of these issues with cheating are stemming from the fact that, we own the hardware that we're playing on. And at the end of the day, we have full control over that. So even as we move into the kernel, it becomes, as we mentioned before, sort of the, virus versus antivirus sort of scenario, except in this case, we're on the side of the virus. And so that came down to a question of, in the kernel, who loaded first? And if it's our hardware, we can ensure that we're always going to load first. So even as you're trying to battle that in the kernel, we can, change a lot of that so that you can actually detect it in there. In addition to this, we see closed platforms. So you can think of things like consoles and otherwise, where we may own the hardware, but it's significantly harder to get access to that underlying hardware. It becomes much harder to actually leverage that to cheat in these games. And so moving towards that sort of system may help fix this problem. Also, some vendors are looking at full streaming of games, which at some point, you'll have your PC, and that'll be acting as sort of a thin client, and all of the data is, sent to the game server, which is processed there, and, you're getting, nothing that you actually have access to on your PC. That one's still, a little bit hard, in particular in the US, because, you can think of the amount of bandwidth that you would be, sending over, and it's also moving all of the processing with the game itself. You'd be moving from the client to the server, which definitely has some implications. All right. So for conclusions, as we talked about, anti-cheat really at this point in time is just a mitigation at best. We've sort of demonstrated that there are comprehensive ways to avoid anti-cheat completely if you have the know-how. In addition to this, it's also creating additional attack surface. So with BattlEye, we found a couple bugs that at the end of the day, it actually making the products more vulnerable than if it was not using them at all. The current anti-cheat, can be, pretty much completely bypassed by using sort of the sort of scenario that we've talked about. So the dual mapping of pages in memory. And finally, we're going to need to see some really fundamental design changes to actually, solve this problem comprehensively. All right. As a bit of a follow-up, so when we originally did this research, it's been close to a year now. We're seeing more and more, as we talked about with BattlEye, for instance, they've implemented the entire kernel driver portion of this, and that has some interesting implications in of itself, because now if you have a bug in that, it goes from you have an application crash to all of a sudden now you have a bug check, and so as you get people like game developers and otherwise that are now writing kernel code, I don't know about you guys, but that can be a little bit troubling depending on who is actually writing that code. And in terms of like third-party developers, do you actually trust them to write kernel code that you're integrating into your product? Yeah. As far as the entire streaming things goes, we're seeing Microsoft is actually developing some solutions. I believe it's called Arcadia. And I believe there are some other vendors that are looking into it as well. And so that's something that we may see trending into the future. Sorry.
So one more thing to follow up on the way that this has been evolving since last year is that now they have, like Joel just mentioned, now they're running the kernel driver. Now, so the kernel driver, from reports, we haven't investigated this personally, but what seems to be the case in the forums is that they are preventing the cheats from getting handled to the game process. So they're basically trying to lock that down. Our method of cheating is just completely unaffected by this. That's the first thing. Now, and then what people started doing is they started using an injector. I forgot the name of it, but essentially it's a DLL injector that works through a kernel driver as well, and then they inject the DLL that way. So then the anti-cheat started detecting that the kernel is running, that the OS is running in test mode. So again, if you are yourself in kernel, you can prevent that kind of detection. So this is the current state of things from a distance, because we haven't again investigated personally, but this is what it looks like right now.
Yeah, that sort of sums up everything. So wanted quick thank you to some of our colleagues for all of their help during this, and wanted to establish that interns are indeed people too. They helped us with the timing attack implementation. So many thanks to them. But any questions? So dealing with cheaters in our games was sort of a mindset in here, and so a lot of different games. I think one of the ones that Nico plays is ripe with cheaters, and to the point where it's unplayable. And so we were really curious, to what extent they were actually, like, how sophisticated were those cheats, and then from there it sort of evolved into, well, how could we do it better? So we can't talk about specifics, but it has come up since with some of our clients, and we've talked to them a little bit about those sorts of things. So it's definitely something that they're thinking about, and they want to solve. Like, they definitely have the intentions. They want to prevent people from doing these things, but it's definitely a tough problem to solve. Yeah, anything you can do server-side is actually preferable. So in a lot of the cheats that we were talking about, like a lot of the things you see with like the network packet manipulation, you can actually detect in server-side functionality. You can ensure that the data that you're receiving actually makes sense and all of that sort of thing. The harder thing is the sort of like extraneous client-side data, because it becomes much harder. As far as like botting and things like that, there's definitely, you can use pattern recognition to actually try to detect reliable patterns and how they're operating, and so that's great. At that point, it becomes a game with randomizing and stuff like that to actually ensure that you look like a human player, right? And so, yes, you should do it. It will help prevent some of them, but again, you're going to see pushback in the other direction too.
Fair enough. So let me reframe that question then. Mm-hmm. Where do you see edge cases in client-side hacks that wouldn't be detected by anomaly detection?
Sorry, can you repeat it?
So where do you see edge cases in client-side hacks that wouldn't otherwise be detected by server-side anomaly detection?
So the ESPs, there's not much you can do about that, right? So the fact that you can, I mean, unless you move into the more general solutions that we're talking about, which is like the full streaming and things like that, if the game architecture requires that the data is sent there, which is the case with the current 3D engines, you need to know that the guy is right there, and also a matter of timing. You know, some of these games are really, really quick. So there's not much you can do about this besides client detection. In this case, you're stuck with that, and it is not a very good return on investment, as Joel pointed out.
Cool. And just my last question then. So as games are trending towards more simpler concepts, where like at the end of the day, the only feasible cheat is botting. So like I'm talking about like the Farmville type, like social casual games on the mobile phones.
We don't play these things around here.
As video games trend away from MMORPGs, where a lot of these hacks are more prevalent, where do you see the cheating community going towards?
That's a tough one. Like you said, it's a pretty.
So I think it's going to end up boiling down to money. So in a game like Farmville, if there's some way that you can interact with other players, and actually, you know, it would come down to botting and things like that. If you can, you know, farm up the resources, which translates into, you know, real world value, I would see that sort of as a big area that they would focus their efforts, just because, you know, successful cheats in that space are going to directly translate into real money. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any others? Yes?
Perf.
But I mean, we're going to end up there right now. You shadow paging on hypervisor. Not
it's true. You know, as you know, based on the previous question, this was not a concerted effort. You know, we started seeing cheats, and the first thing was just like, and being, you know, players from the 90s, we're just like, whoa, how did they do that? So you start looking into how they do it, and then you realize, oh, how do they detect that? And then one thing leads to another, and because of our, you know, previous, you know, experiences, then, you know, we were comfortable writing a driver pretty quickly to dual map pages, and so we're like, hey, I bet if we do that, they can detect it. So we did that, and then it worked. It was not, you know, but you could do something with Hyper-V. Well, I don't know if Hyper-V supports 3D, but you know, I know some hypervisors will support, you know, visualization of 3D cards. That's a possibility as well. Yeah, that can definitely go towards that. Actually, we are actually aware with efforts in academics to detect whether you're running within a Hyper-V machine. You know, a virtualized machine, so a virtualized box. So yeah, it's definitely an area where it could very likely go towards. Yeah, we feel like streaming is going to become that's a guess though. We feel like streaming is going to become bigger and bigger, and it's going to make this whole deal of kernel drivers or hypervisors is going to make this a bit, you know, irrelevant in the long term. So. That's true. That's true. It's a never-ending story. Do you have any other questions? Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for your time and your attention.